Final Fantasy VII is one of the most impactful games of all time, and was probably one of the best looking games at the time of its release. The turnaround on it was insane as well. Going from the full pixel art of Final Fantasy VI to 3D with completely pre-rendered backgrounds and full motion video in just about 3 years is crazy. On top of the already great visuals is one of the greatest games ever made. The story is immaculate and has many twists and turns along the way, which is also complemented by some of the most fun gameplay the series has to offer. I played it shortly after finishing the remake and it quickly stole my heart and became one of my favorite games of all time. And since then, I've been slowly making my way through the rest of the series. But even though I have so many games to finish, I always found myself having the itch to just boot up Final Fantasy VII because of my fond memories with it. And finally, after like a year, I made a big enough dent in said backlog that I can play it again. So, without further ado, it's time to talk about the game that took 90s kids by storm. The story is where Final Fantasy VII really shines. It's one of the best stories ever told. You play as Cloud Strife, who is a bit cuckoo in the head. Like, dude, you're hearing voices, you should probably go get that checked out or something. He decided to take a job with Avalanche, who are terrorists that, shocker, aren't really good guys, but they're not really bad either. Their whole goal is to take out the Mako reactors because Shitra is using them to take a whole lot of Mako out of the Earth and by proxy damaging it. So they decide to go straight for the source. No, not like that! And that goes about as well as you'd expect, and oh, they're all dead now. After learning that Sephiroth is still roaming about, they decide to hunt him down and try to kill him, assuming that will save the planet. And then boom! A big open area for you to explore. Upon arriving in Calm, Cloud gives the rundown of what happened in Nibelheim and how after Sephiroth reads a few books, he becomes evil. This is why you shouldn't read, kids, you might become Sephiroth. However, when the gang arrives in Nibelheim, nothing is burnt to the ground and there's still people living there. Which means the main character you've been following the whole time turns out to be an unreliable narrator and a filthy little liar. Time to get the soap. And then the game takes a very unexpected turn. Sephiroth ends up using Cloud to give him the black materia as well as making him a misogynist. From that moment onward, the story gets taken up a notch and is super compelling. The story's pacing is quite good for a majority of it, aside from one part where your fucking friend dies, but you'll be snowboarding like a few minutes later. The cast in FF7 is pretty alright, however I wasn't really invested in any of the characters aside from the ones you meet in Midgar. They just didn't have any interesting developments, like Sid stays an abusive asshole, Yuffie and Vincent are optional, so it kind of makes sense that their stories aren't that fleshed out, and who the fuck are you? Luckily everyone else has some pretty damn good character development, and trust me, you'll be feeling all of the emotions during the story. Also, for Square's first time using any sort of CG in a game, it's pretty damn good. They heighten any moment they're used in, and I love how the characters look like action figures. It's very fitting for the time FF7 came out. The combat's foundation is the stuff you'd expect a turn-based RPG to have. You can attack, defend, and use magic. However, what sets this game apart is the ATB bar. Once the bar fills, you're able to do an action, which ends up meaning if you act fast enough, it's possible to get multiple rounds of attacks on your opponent, making the game feel faster in turn. If it's not fast enough though, there is an option to make it faster. But the real combat starts after you obtain a few materia, which give you all the abilities and magic you could ask for. It also allows for any party members to be used together since no one's restricted to certain roles. Anyone can take up that healer role or tank role. And on top of that, they add endless replayability because of how many different combinations of materia you can do. There's just so many that you're bound to get new ones on a repeat playthrough. But it's not all great, unfortunately. Switching up materia to other members of the party is a pain in the ass. You have to make sure to remove all of the materia from them before taking them out of the party, and then you gotta put all the materia on that character. That's the main reason I never really swap my party around, it's just too much of a hassle. Going back to the fights themselves, they are so cinematic. The camera pans around the fight as you're waiting around, and some attacks get their own cinematics to go with them. They put everything into the presentation of the fights. The enemy variety is a bit lacking. Every area obviously has their own sets of enemies, but there was only like a few you'd keep running into, which made fights a bit less interesting over the course of the game. Along with some of the animations, which can make combat feel slow at times since you're just sitting there waiting for it to end, but I like seeing cool shit happen, so it never really bugged me. Speaking of long animations, along the way you'll get some red materia, which are for summons, who are extremely powerful but are a big commitment to use in more ways than one. For the most part, they are a one-time use in battle unless you get a specific item. You also better be ready for some pretty long cutscenes because goddamn some take quite a long time. Like, Knights of the Round takes up a whole ass 2 minutes! But hey, the longer they are, the more damage they do. Or at least that's my rule of thumb. Limit breaks sort of work as a comeback mechanic. It fills as you take damage and does a shit ton of damage. It's the only thing that really sets the characters apart in combat since they all have different ones. It also carries over from fight to fight, so you don't have to use it. However, it does take away the normal attack until it's used, which sucks because I've accidentally used it by just spamming to take out the common enemy more than once, and got upset since I was saving it for a boss or something. Speaking of which, Final Fantasy VII unfortunately has some of the coolest boss designs ever. The reason I say unfortunately is, well, this game is pretty easy, so you end up not seeing a boss's full moveset because they'll be dead in a few turns. I will say though, if you end up not breaking the game over your knee, it becomes a whole different game pretty much because, you know, strategy is a thing you'll need. That's the beauty of this game's combat. There's so many different ways to play, whether it's breaking it in half or trying to make the game more difficult for yourself by being underleveled and not using broken materia. The world in Final Fantasy VII seems like there's not much to do in it, and at the start there's really not. You're set on a linear path in Midgard, just following the story, but then things start opening up to a degree where it's almost too much. I was honestly surprised because on my first playthrough I basically beelined straight to the story without really doing much of the side stuff. So this time around I decided to take more time with it, and I missed out on hours of side content. But I swear to God, if I have to breed one more goddamn chocobo, I'll burn that fucking stable to the ground. Your reward for exploring is, of course, materia. Little things beat the rush you get after obtaining a new materia or one you already got. More. I need more. Final Fantasy VII sure does love its minigames. At first they're fun, but then everything becomes a minigame. Like, seriously, fucking everything is a minigame. You wanna open a door? Guess what? Minigame. Tifa's life is about to come to an end? Minigame. Oh, did you need the huge materia to stop meteor crashing down and destroying the whole world? Minigame! Alright, feels good to get that out of my system. What the fuck is that? Yeah, so the weapons aren't too happy about the whole meteor thing going on right now and try to save the planet. Hey, fuck you, buddy, that's my job. You want a tussle? Yeah, that's what I thought. Moving on from that, Cloud and Sephiroth are some of the most iconic characters in gaming. However, I think there's one thing more iconic than both of them. The soundtrack is fucking incredible. It was hands down my favorite video game soundtrack for a long time. It was the first thing I knew about FF7 because I listened to it quite often. The battle theme is pretty good and it never got old even after 20-something hours. The boss theme is also great. It gets you pumped and ready for the big battle ahead of you. Of course, you can't talk about boss themes without mentioning the greatest one ever. One Winged Angel is fucking peak, dude. It's still my favorite final boss theme to this day. The beginning notes are so iconic. Anytime you hear it, you know shit's going down. And then the choir kicks in and it's immaculate the whole way. Aerith's theme is also up there with One Winged Angel. It's one of the most beautifully composed songs ever. Like, I swear it was scientifically crafted to squeeze your tears out. And the fact it keeps playing during the boss fight too, like, come on man, time out! My vision's already blurry. Despite me not being born for the release of Final Fantasy VII, I still felt some sort of nostalgia during my first playthrough. I guess that's the power of video games. During my second playthrough, I realized how comfy FF7 is for me. By the end, I already wanted to jump back in and start a new playthrough. Everything about the combat just combines together really well and makes me want to experiment with it. Unfortunately, I have videos to make, so I can't keep playing it. It would be cool if they expanded upon this game's story though. Oh,